Space Coast Church, and we've begun a series on the Sermon on the Mount, and today I'm going to cover the introduction of that. This is the first of 6 lessons. I actually got to preach this live for a group of us at the pavilion last week at Rotary Park, but some of us missed that because of the weather and everything else, but I wanted to just go ahead and record a lesson so we can all get caught up. And so here is the introduction to the Sermon on the Mount. You know, Paul teaches us in Ephesians 5, starting in verse 8, this is something he says. He goes, "You are the light of the world. Walk as children of the light. For the fruit of the light is found in all that is good and right and true. And try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord." You know, I love the way that the ESV version translates that part where they use the word discern. In the NIV, it also uses consider or to find out. And in the NET, there's a really interesting way that they render this passage, and they say for us to learn what is pleasing to the Lord. And so, you know, as we consider, as we discern, what is it that God desires for us? You know, we've been baptized, we're now a part of God's kingdom. You know, how does a person walk in a way that is pleasing to the Lord? Well, you know, Jesus gave us exactly that. The Sermon on the Mount is an incredible sermon. It's about 20 minutes in length if you preach the sermon, if you would give time for dramatic pause and voice inflection, etc., as Jesus would have probably naturally presented this on the Mount that day. It's about a 20-minute sermon. So I'm still working on trying to get my sermons down to 20 minutes and have such an impact. Maybe at some point in my life I'll get there. But this is what Jesus does. Jesus gives us an incredible insight into how to walk in a manner pleasing to God and living out what it means to be his disciple and to become more like him. And so this is the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew Henry gave us some great commentary on this. He says, "Christ preached this sermon, which was an exposition of the law, up on a mountain, because upon the mountain it was the law that was given to the people. But observe the difference here. When the law was given, the Lord came down upon the mountain. Now the Lord went up. Then he spoke in thunder and lightning. Now in a still small voice. Then the people were ordered to keep their distance. And now they are invited to draw near." What a blessed change. You know, in his time, you know, the religious people, in Jesus' time, the religious people, they didn't get it. And they were teaching about God and how to please him in a way that was very different than what Jesus teaches us. In fact, they were way off the mark. And so let's look into what it is that Jesus teaches us in the Sermon on the Mount. Let's look at the intro. So we'll be in Matthew 5 today, and starting in verse 1. "When he saw the crowds, he went up to the mountain. After he sat down, his disciples came to him, and then he began to teach them by saying, 'Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to them. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil things about you falsely on account of me. Rejoice and be glad, because your reward is great in heaven. For they persecuted the prophets before you in the same way.'" Jesus goes on to teach us. He says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if it loses its flavor, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by people. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. People do not light up a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before people so that they can see your good deeds and give honor to your Father in heaven." You know, what unfolds and what Jesus does here in the Sermon on the Mount, it really gives us an insight and helps us to see the heart of God in the Old Testament and what he desires from us all along. So let's break it down and see what it is that we learn. The first beatitude, or the first thing that Jesus mentions, and an attitude that we should become more like or embrace, a new paradigm, a new mindset for us as followers of Jesus, is to be poor in spirit. To be poor in spirit simply means this: to be humble, knowing that you need God, that there's a desperate part of you that just recognizes your own depravity, recognizes that, man, I can't do this alone. I need Jesus. You should never think more highly of yourselves than you ought. In Deuteronomy 9, we're reminded of that time when God was telling the Israelites, look, don't think that you were chosen because of your righteousness. No, in fact, it's quite the opposite. I'm paraphrasing here. But he said it was because of the wickedness of the people around you. And so the lesson there is that, we've got to recognize that we always have a desperate need for God. And when we do that, we're in the right place and God can work with that. I'm reminded of a passage where it talks about how he lifts up or exalts the humble, but also takes down the proud. Psalm 26:16 says this: "Turn toward me and have mercy on me, for I am alone and oppressed." I think this really captures this whole idea of being poor in spirit. The second beatitude is this: blessed are those who mourn. This is almost like the first one. It's a mindset. It's what are you looking at? How are you feeling? It's almost a paradox, because how can someone who mourn be comforted, right? And so this here is what the writer, what Jesus is saying when he was teaching, and when Matthew wrote this down. This mourning is more than the grieving of a loved one or someone that we've lost that is important to us. But it's being more in touch with the heart of God, mourning for the things that he would mourn over, or that he does mourn over. It's the sin of the world. Think back to Genesis and the time of the flood. In Genesis 6, we learn that our sin, the violence, the evils, the injustice, the things that happen because of our hearts, the things that we do, it grieves God. It breaks his heart. And so when we mourn in the sense that when we are trying to feel what God feels, what Jesus says is you will be comforted, because his kingdom is coming. Jesus is coming back. He will wipe every tear. And all that sin that destroys your life, mine, the world around us, well, that's going to be gone. And so then you will be comforted. The third posture, or the third beatitude, is meekness. Now, meekness is not synonymous with weakness. I know we equate it with that, and often in our own culture, we consider those who are meek to be weak. But meek is very different. It's a chosen posture that meekness is when we choose to be approachable. We choose to be gentle, right? We know that Jesus was meek without question, and he wasn't weak by any means, right? We know that him to be strong, and at any time he could have called down a legion of angels to protect him and do all the things, but he chose to take on the form of a servant. That is what it means to be meek. So followers of Jesus then would, in kind, become more like him, become a servant, choosing to be so. It takes more strength for a person to deny themselves and to be meek than it is to push people around and to be rough around the edges. And so that's what we see in Christ. The fourth one that we see here is to hunger and thirst for righteousness. I love this part. It's something that I have really tried to emulate in my own life, just having this deep desire, this passion, this thirst for God. Righteousness is all about relationship, right? And so my question is, would you describe your desire for a right relationship with God as a hunger or a thirst? Are you you want it so badly that it's like, running outside in the heat for, 20, 30 minutes, and you just have that deep thirst? Is that something that you have for God? Or maybe you've gone a whole day without eating. You've been working and running around and doing your thing. Maybe you work all day and you didn't get lunch and you're just driving home and you're like, I'm so hungry. You call your spouse or your roommates or whatever and you're like, hey, what's for dinner? I'm starving. Is that feeling, would that also describe your hunger, your thirst for God? And is it unquenchable? Is it when you get that drink of God, you just want more? I hope that describes you. Ezekiel 18:7 says this uh, about someone who hungers for God or the righteousness of God, that they do not oppress anyone, but give a debtor back whatever is given in pledge, and does not commit robbery, but gives his bread to the hungry and clothes the naked. And so basically, what then does your hunger for closeness with God drive you to do? Right? We understand obedience later on in the Gospels. Jesus talks about how obedience expresses our love towards God. So, what are the kinds of things that you do in order to express that hunger or thirst that you have to be close to Him, that righteousness? And so, if you're the kind of person if you're a disciple that goes after doing good deeds because you know that they're right to do, not just because you're told to do them, if you see things in the Bible and you're like, I need to do this, and you really try your best to do those things, and even call others to, hey, help me to be better in this area. That's what this passage is talking about. And so those first four beatitudes, they represent basically us recognizing our need for salvation and acting suitably because of what God has done for us. These are things in our character that we strive for, not that we actually possess them. And so these next three beatitudes, they're slightly different in the sense that because you are saved, because you do belong to Jesus, then these are the types of things that you should be doing, right? And so the next beatitude is, blessed are the merciful. Showing mercy is huge. Compassion is part of God's name, right? And so we need to be compassionate. We need to show mercy. As His image bearers, disciples of Jesus, we need to be merciful. Extending mercy means we withhold judgment. Think of the parable when the king forgave the debt of the person who had owed him 10,000 talents or 10,000 bags of gold. Can you imagine? I mean, the cost of gold today by the ounce. I mean, we're talking about billions of dollars that this person owed. I don't know how you rack up a debt like that. But then there was a person who basically owed him just 20 coins or maybe a small bag of silver. So you can understand by today's standards what a contrast that is. And the difference in this person, so the king forgave him for the billions of dollars of gold that he owed, but yet when it came down to 100 or even $2,500 that this other servant owed, he wasn't merciful. And so what did the king do? When he found out that the servant wasn't merciful towards someone else, he then called to account all the debt that he owed. And so there's a great lesson there. But the idea, again, is that because we've been shown mercy, we need to show mercy towards others. The next one, pure in heart. The pure in heart are those who are single-minded in their devotion to God, and therefore are morally pure inwardly. Right? The inner purity is important in you as you consider that relationship between you and God. Many times this is a strong theme in the Old Testament with regards to morality and God not wanting His people to intermingle with the Gentiles, with the pagan world around them. Not because, He wanted you to hate them or anything like that. In fact, Jesus teaches later on in the sermon about how we should treat our enemies, etc. So it wasn't that. It was that God wanted them to remain His. He's a jealous God, and He doesn't want to share you with anyone. And so when we give into these types of things, idolatry and the other things that we are led astray, making us impure, it's hard for us to walk close with God. And so the whole idea here is for us to walk pure, to keep our minds and our thoughts, our heart on God in so many ways. It says here, in the future, when we're with God, we shall be completely pure in our hearts and we shall see this glory. That's in 1 John 3:2. I love this thing. It says, the pure in heart see God in creation and circumstance, in all creation and circumstances, and also in His word. And so to be pure in heart, again, it's what are you focused on and what are you driving towards? The next one is peacemakers. It says the peacemakers will be called children or sons of God. And again, this is us doing exactly what Jesus did, because he did this for us. He reconciled us to God. That was his mission, to seek and save that which was lost, to restore the relationship between creator and the created, between us and our Father. And so likewise, that's supposed to be our mission. You and I, we're meant to go and help people to be reconciled to God, to restore that right relationship between them and their Father, to help them to understand his great love for them, and to aptly describe and help them to see who God truly is. And so this is such an important role. Um, People who seek to make peace between men and between man and God, they are sons of God. They are doing the work of Jesus. Israel was called to be peacemakers. It's interesting, God put this people right at the crossroads of the earth. If you look where Israel is in the old world, between the old empire of Egypt and the new empires of Babylon and so forth, and that trade route between Rome and all those places, this Israel, this little country, was at the crossroads of the world. And so God really wanted them to be a blessing to the world. That was a promise to Abraham way back, that they would be a blessing. And so by being peacemakers, we live up to that blessing, and we begin to bless the nations. And so there are two main points basically from the message today. And so thinking about those beatitudes and how we should be, we get two things out of that. And so the first thing is, you're going to be persecuted. It's interesting where it says in verse 11 and 12, blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil things about you falsely on account of me. Jesus says, rejoice and be glad when they do that. Living like Jesus basically does two things. It brings light into the darkness, and to those in the dark, well, it makes them aware of their unrighteousness. And, in Romans, with regards to sinful action, we see people who, they not only do these things, talking about evil and sin, but they approve of those who practice them. And so as long as you're behaving like everybody else, you're, drinking and partying and carousing and cursing and up on the latest everything, gadget and greed, and, when you're just like everyone else, they approve of you. It says, be wary of those. Be wary and not be a person who everybody likes, And so this is the thing. As disciples, we should live differently. Now, that doesn't mean we don't live in the world, right? Because we're in the world, but we're not meant to be of the world. And so when we act differently, when we live righteously and we help others to do the same, well, you're going to be persecuted just as Jesus was. It said, the world hated me. It will hate you also. But here's the most important thing. So the first thing is, you're going to be persecuted. But the second one is this, and this is what's so beautiful. It says, you are the salt of the earth. But if salt loses its flavor, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by people. You are the light of the world, a city on the hill that cannot be hidden. People do not light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to the house. In the same way, let your light shine before people so that they can see your good deeds and give honor to your Father in heaven. And so the second thing we get from this intro and who we're meant to be in Christ is that we become a beacon of hope for those who are seeking refuge. Salt is one of the first example that Jesus uses here. Salt in ancient times, as is today, it's a preservative. It's something that helps things last. You hear of salt curing meats, keeping meat from going rotten. This is what they used in the time of Jesus. They would have been familiar with this example and understood that they were meant to be a preservative. They were meant to preserve humanity and help them to walk closely with God. I learned an interesting fact that when the salt loses its saltiness, they would use it to throw it down on the roofs, the earth, the dirt on the roofs, and also on the roads, because as they would do that and the roads got wet, that salt would cause the pathways to become hard, or the roof to become hard, and then so in the future repel water. And so thinking about that, if we lose our saltiness, we can be trampled underfoot. We're no good for anything other than to be trampled underfoot. Basically, helping the world's hearts to become even more hard. So we definitely don't want to be doing that as followers of Jesus. And so we're meant to be salt. The second one I really am drawn to, this beacon of hope. There's this woman, her last name Chadwick. She was a swimmer, and I think about this story. It's just so compelling to me because again, we're this beacon of hope, and just to tell you how important hope is, this story does a great job of illustrating. Uh, Miss Chadwick entered a swimming competition. She was a long distance swimmer from around the 50s, the 1950s, and she swam the English Channel. She swam all kinds of long distance areas, a lot of different channels and things like that throughout her lifetime. But in swimming the English Channel, she actually had the record of crossing the channel for a long time. At one time, she wanted to swim across the San Diego Bay, and she had done these things at different times. And so at one time, she was swimming across it, and during this journey, the fog rolls in San Diego. California has a lot of fog rolling in, and so this fog rolls in, and she'd been swimming for about an hour in this dense fog, and obviously couldn't see the shore or whatever. After about an hour of this swimming in the fog, she just couldn't do it anymore. There was boats that would flank her as she was swimming. They would protect her from sharks, and in case she needed any help, she would be rescued by the boats. And so she just called out to her mom and said, I just can't make it. And so they pull her back inside the boat. And she was so distraught because she realized she was only a mile from shore. A swim that she had made plenty of times, had done these types of distances before, but because she couldn't see the shore, she had lost hope. It's such a powerful thing. Later on, she went and attempted again to cross the San Diego Bay, and this time she was she accomplished it. Even though the fog rolled in again, the thing that kept her going is she remembered, the shore it's just right there. She remembered how close she was the last time, and this time, even though there was fog, she was able to make it. That's the thing about the beacon. We are meant to be a beacon for others. That beacon, even if though you could see it so far off in the distance, it really gives you security and it really gives you hope. I can relate to this story in another way too. One time my wife and I, we were out in our boat. We had a little jet boat, 15-foot boat. It's really good for intercoastal travel. Small, little choppy conditions or flat conditions are best. You definitely don't want to be out in things, waves over 1 foot or 2 foot. Certainly not. But anyways, one day we're in Pompano Beach. We rented a cute little hotel room, and there was dock space there, so we had our boat in the dock. It was really cool. We were parked next to all these yachts. But anyways, we took off in our little boat. We shot down the intercoastal south towards Miami. We hung out in Miami for a little bit, had dinner. That trip took us about 4 hours. But knowing the weather and realizing that it was, in the summer, there was a high pressure system. There was actually no waves. It was less than 1 foot out on the ocean side. And at night, when the sun goes down, it gets even flatter. And so I knew the travel home would be a lot quicker from Miami to Pompano Beach coming back. And so at night, we were traveling at night. And so we're heading north. And so on my left, which would be facing west, was the shoreline. And I could see all the lights from the hotel. And I was keeping myself offshore at plenty of distance from shore at the swimming buoys, making sure that we weren't crossing over there. It was really helpful. But the thing that really made me feel confident that I was actually going to make the drive to get where I needed to go was in Pompano, there's a lighthouse there. And so once I was able to see that lighthouse, I felt very secure. I thought, okay, we're going to make it. And not that I was worried that, we're going to, sink or anything like that. If I ran into any trouble, I could have just run the boat ashore. But it was definitely a comfort knowing, hey, we're going to make it back to the hotel room tonight. No issues with the boat. And so that's the thing, we are meant to be a beacon for others. We're the ones that, because they see how God has worked in our own lives. That's why Jesus says, let your good deeds shine before men. Since we let people into our lives to see how God has moved in our own lives, and this gives hope to others, hope for them that they can make it. If our light's withheld, if it's covered up, then they don't have any hope. They have no way to know, hey, God can work on me too. That's why I love it. When I think about Yorka's life and my life, my wife Yorka and myself, when I think about our lives and how far God has taken us, I mean, there's a lot of people. Look, if God saved Jose, if God saved Yorka, man, he's definitely, unless he ran out of grace. No, he just didn't. um, God did this for you, for us. He can certainly do it for you. And so as I close, in this intro, Jesus begins to unfold an amazing truth. And that is the essence of what God desires for us and how we can truly please him, how we can walk in a manner pleasing to him. And this is not only of great benefit to us personally, but it also fulfills the opening to the prayer that Jesus taught when he said, "Let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." God's will for this earth is that everyone would be reconciled to him. That's why he sent Jesus, was so that everyone would come and know the truth, to have an opportunity to be saved. The beatitudes, or these attitudes that should make our being, this is just the beginning. The starting points of meditating on God and his goodness and our partnership with him as he pursues to reconcile all things to himself. Amen.